The United States doesn't offer any mandated vacation days at all, but there are countries in Europe that offer their citizens 25 paid vacation days. That's on top of 20 paid holidays. Want to find out which countries they are? Stick around, I'll show you. Welcome to Balancing the Scales, the Economic Justice Report. This is your host, Vic Bernsdorf, and on today's show we're going to be talking about these three topics. How America has become a failed state, Europe's employee benefits, and the voting records of Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Lindsey Graham. So let's start with first topic, how America has become a failed state. Start with an overview. What's the definition of a failed state? Well, basically, a failed state is a government that can no longer function or carry out the responsibilities of a sovereign nation that's supposed to provide for its citizenry. Yeah? These are some typical characteristics of a failed state that we've seen in the past in other countries. Civil violence, corruption, crime, poverty, illiteracy, crumbling infrastructure. And also when a government loses credibility amongst its citizenry, as we have today. Personal story. This is a perfect example of how America has failed its citizens. And this story comes from an article I found on truthout.org, which is titled, Hedda Martin Sent Begging for Her Heart Transplant. I'm going to quote now for the article. Hedda Martin's chemotherapy for breast cancer led to cardiac damage, and her physicians concluded that she needed a heart transplant. But a Michigan hospital committee rejected her, sending her to hit up family, friends, and strangers for cash. The decision made by the committee is that you are not a candidate at this time for a heart transplant because you don't have enough money. The committee is therefore recommending a fundraising effort to come up with about $10,000. Continuing now from the article, so Hedda was forced to turn to the GoFundMe website to beg for help with her medical needs. Even the GoFundMe CEO says, and I quote from him, the system is terrible. Politicians are failing us. Healthcare companies are failing us. That's quote. That was the end of that article. But let me tell you something. This is the best example I could think of a failed state. And if it's not the best example, then I don't know what is. You know, Hedda's experience is not unique, folks. Because of our greedy healthcare insurance companies and their bought-out politician friends, there are non-stop stories like this all across America every day. Why? Because capitalism is a law of the land in America. It has been for the last 50 years. Actually, it has been for the last 100 years. Only personal gain or private profit is considered important in this country. Not human health or happiness, at all. Let's watch this video clip, come back and talk about it.
There's a crisis that's been building for a long time that exists regardless of coronavirus. And that is an economic crisis or a socioeconomic crisis, a crisis in healthcare, and a crisis in government.
These are indicators of what economists call a failed state, a nation on the brink of collapse. The term is as grim as it sounds. Wealth.
People in concentrated geographic areas are not having basic human needs and wants met. And that makes it incredibly unsurprising when you also see that these are many of the same hotspots where there are high levels of crime, which is a very good indicator of state failure.
Despite America's status as the largest economy in the world, its infrastructure, education, and healthcare have all been in consistent decline. The US is now 34th among all nations, and perhaps the most critical measure of all, life expectancy.
But if you actually add the amount of money its government spends per person with what people spend themselves, so public and private sector, it spends way more money than any other country on earth per person and has some of the worst health outcomes in the OECD.
So the OECD, just so you know, is a reference to, I think, like 20 of the most advanced countries in the world. But isn't that horrible what you just heard? You know, basically America has lost the trust in the American people, flat out. Otherwise we wouldn't have these warring factions all the time, you know? And we suffer from ongoing civil violence and corruption at all levels of government and industry. And we got tons of poor people. We got crumbling roads and bridges, buildings, and highways that needs at least $3 trillion in repairs. So by all these indicators, America has become a failed state. But I think American citizens are also equally complicit in America's failings. What I mean is, folks, why does Hedda Martin have to suffer so much? Physically and financially. What? Does France, England, and Germany, those countries, or any Scandinavian country, allow their students to suffer that much? Physically and financially? No. So why is it this way? Well, because I think a lot of us Americans are more afraid of socialized medicine than we are of going bankrupt and paying for our medical care. If we were smart here in America, we should have forced our elected officials to provide universal health care a long time ago, as the right of citizenship, like all other advanced countries. And get this, not just advanced countries. Now even Rwanda has universal health care. That's how far behind America is in providing any form of dignity for our citizens. Okay, now on to our next segment. Okay, so this show segment is all about Europe's employee benefits and how they compare to what we have here in America. So let me start with an overview of employee benefits in general. Here in the United States, under FMLA, new parents are entitled to, get this, 12 weeks of unpaid parental leave. Isn't that great, huh? Whoopee! That's fantastic, isn't it? Let's have a detailed view now of what countries on the other side of the pond have, huh? Okay, let's start with employee benefits. The United States offers between 40% and 50% of earnings for up to 26 weeks, depending on individual states. It's a lot more in Europe, folks. For example, the Danish people get 90% of their previous salaries for up to 104 weeks. Okay, what about sick leave? The United States has no mandate for paid sick days. Sick leave days are part of whatever compensation package you can negotiate with your employer. That's not the case in the Netherlands, for example. Over there, sick leave and pay are really generous. Workers can be absent from work for up to 104 weeks, 2 years, while receiving 70% of their salary. Let's talk about paid holidays now, and annual leave. Again, there's no statutory annual leave entitlement here in the United States, mandated by the government. The average number of paid vacation days, on average, that companies provide is about 10 days. But they're rarely taken. They're rarely taken because of fears of not being a team player or being afraid of being laid off and replaced. It's a real fear. Paid holidays in the European Union, on the other hand, are set at a minimum of 4 weeks, about 20 days per year. Sweden, France, and Denmark offer 5 weeks for a standard Monday to Friday job. Okay? Now let's talk about maternity benefits. Again, the U.S. has no mandated maternity or paternity policy, whereas maternity leave in European Union countries have to amount to a minimum of 14 weeks, mandated. The UK offers the longest maternity leave, 52 weeks at almost 90% of pay. Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, France, Austria, and Denmark all offer at or near 14 weeks at full pay of maternity leave. Okay, for paternity leave, again, the United States has no mandated leave for that. New fathers in Finland get the most leave by far with about 400 working days, or 9 weeks off.
Europe is the world leader when it comes to social protection. The EU has set global standards for fighting poverty, well-being, family cohesion, and work-life balance. How welfare systems are run is left up to individual member states, but the European Parliament calls for higher standards. One example of this is the Families Package.
We call for a paternity leave directive. We say it is essential and urgent. We ask member states to extend the period of parental leave.
What really sets EU countries apart from non-EU countries is the buffer of time offered to the working parents. At least 4 months of parental leave during the 8 first years of a child's life. Dario lives in Italy and works in the public administration of Rome. He is allowed to take 30 days of parental leave, spread over a longer period.
Why did I bring up this segment? Why did I include this segment in today's show? Well, here's the takeaway. American companies keep losing competitiveness because they have to pay for employee benefits that the government should be providing for their workers. And anyway, this is also what qualifies America as a failed state. That's why I included it at the first segment. Since, except for Democratic Party developed programs like Social Security and Medicare, the government has never accepted the responsibility to provide for the general welfare of its citizens. This country has this stupid pull yourself up by your bootstraps and don't ask the government for anything attitude has created massive personal economic suffering and pain. You know, governments in other advanced countries, like in Europe and Scandinavian countries, they have much more compassionate logic, which goes like this. We're all part of a society, and therefore interdependent upon each other, so let's support and provide for one another. That's the kind of attitude they have, okay? Go it alone BS is not realistic. It's not part of society, okay, let's move on now to our last show segment. Okay, in this last show segment, we're going to be looking at the voting records of Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Lindsey Graham. And you'll be able to see who they really care about. What are their real values? Who do they support in the American society? Is it the middle class and the poor, or is it the 1% in corporations? Let's look at the voting record of Kamala Harris. Now, this information comes to you from a website called politics.work.com. And it consolidates the voting records of congressmen and senators and looks at trends within their voting records to see who they really value. This is an incredibly powerful website because, like I said, I've looked at the voting records and always wanted to know what's the trend, right? Why should I vote for my representative? What has he done for me? Have his votes represented my values, right? So, let's check out the voting record of Senator Kamala Harris from, again, the website politics.work.com. It sure looks to me like she favors the middle class 100% of the time. She also favors broad civil rights 100% of the time. And in some specific policy areas, she votes for public health, internet freedom, consumer protection, women's rights, gun control, financial sector regulation, and racial equality 100%. So now in contrast, let's look at the voting record of Senator Lindsey Graham and see what are his values. As you can see, he pretty much favors the wealthy 96.4% of the time based on his voting record. And also based on his voting record, he favors very narrow civil rights. And he's big on taxing the middle class 100% of the time. So why am I bringing up the voting records? Well, their votes are their values. And when you vote, you're matching your values to your representatives' values, or to representatives that are supposed to match your values, right? Otherwise, why vote, right? Folks, at every election you participate in, don't sell yourself cheap. Don't sell your vote cheap. Make your representatives earn it. Always remember the Republican strategy of using gods, guns, and gays when they talk to their constituents. How does focusing on those issues help you pay the bills when you have a newborn child that you want to spend time with? Or are sick and can't afford that $35,000 surprise hospital bill you got from your last cancer treatment, huh? These are just Republican talking points intended to direct their voters' attention on social issues so they don't have to provide them with economic support or programs that would actually improve their lives. Whoever you vote for, make sure they earn your vote by asking for programs and policies that actually benefit you and your family, like providing national maternal and paternal leave, a national sick leave policy, and universal health care that's affordable and stays with you for life. Well, that's the show for today. Thanks for watching. Next week I'll be talking about how Americans are really afraid of their economic future. And then I'll be finishing the show by talking about the voting records of Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Mitch McConnell. If you like the topics I present on the show, please consider subscribing. In any event, have a great day. And always remember, you deserve the government you vote for.